In July of 1939, a 12-year-old named Don Fendler got separated from his group in a cloud bank on Maine's Mount Katahdin. He walked out 9 days later, alive, having lost his shoes and 30 pounds. He survived on tricks his elders taught him. Number 14 on this list has kept more lost hikers alive than any GPS ever will. And number 3, survival instructors now teach it in elite military schools, but your great-grandfather knew it by 10. These 25 skills were once ordinary, passed down on hunting trips and cold farm mornings. Then we traded them for cell signals. Hit that subscribe button. Let us count down the 25 forgotten wilderness tricks that kept our grandparents alive. Number 25, the watch compass. Before a phone told you which way was north, your grandfather could find his direction with a watch on his wrist. On a sunny day, he held the watch flat and pointed the hour hand straight at the sun. Then he imagined a line splitting the angle between that hour hand and the 12. That halfway line pointed south. It sounds like a parlor trick, but it works because the sun and the clock both march across the sky on a schedule, and a man who understood that schedule was never truly lost. Hunters used it to walk a straight line out of unfamiliar timber instead of wandering in the slow, doomed circle that panic always draws. It cost nothing and needed no batteries, and a pocket watch handed down from a father was worth more in the deep woods than any gadget sold today. Number 24, moss and bark navigation. Everybody has heard that moss grows on the north side of a tree, and everybody who repeats it as gospel has never been lost. Your grandfather knew the truth was subtler. Moss favors the shadier, damper side, which in the northern half of the country tends to be north, but only tends to. So he did not trust one tree. He read the whole forest. He looked at the bark, drier and lighter on the sunny southern face, darker and rougher on the shaded side. He looked at how the branches reached fuller toward the open south. He read a dozen trees, took the average, and trusted the pattern, not the single clue. That was the real skill, and it is the one nobody teaches anymore. Reading one sign is superstition. Reading 100 and letting them vote is woodcraft. The forest was always telling you where you stood if you knew how to listen to all of it at once. Number 23, following the animals to water. A lost man's first real enemy is not hunger, it is thirst, and thirst arrives fast. Your grandfather did not go hunting blindly for a creek. He let the animals do the searching. Game trails, those narrow, packed dirt paths worn through the brush, almost always lead somewhere useful, and in dry country they bend downhill toward water. Converging trails, 2 or 3 braiding into one, were an even better sign, because animals funnel toward the places they all need. He watched the birds too, since songbirds fly low and straight toward water near dawn and dusk. And he watched for insects swarming and for greener vegetation in a fold of the land. Everything alive in the forest was already going where he needed to go. He just had the sense to follow the traffic instead of fighting it, and that patience kept him drinking when a panicked man would have died with a spring a quarter mile away. Number 22, the shadow stick. On a clear day with no watch, your grandfather could still find true direction with a stick and a patch of open dirt. He pushed a straight stick upright into the ground and marked the tip of its shadow with a pebble. Then he waited. 15 minutes later, the shadow had crept to a new spot, and he marked that tip too. A line drawn between those two pebbles ran roughly east and west, because the sun always travels west, so shadows always creep east. Stand with the first mark on your left and the second on your right, and you are facing north. It was slow, and that slowness was the point. It forced a scared man to sit down, breathe, and let the sky answer him. And half of survival is nothing more than refusing to move until you actually know something. Number 21, steering by the North Star. When the sun went down and every direction looked identical in the black, the sky still held one fixed point. Your grandfather would locate the Big Dipper, that great ladle everyone can pick out, and follow the two stars at the front lip of its bowl. Draw a line straight up from them, about 5 times the distance between them, and you land on Polaris, the North Star. Unlike every other star, Polaris does not wheel through the night. It sits nearly motionless over the North Pole, a nail hammered into the dark. Point yourself at it and you are pointed north until dawn. Sailors crossed oceans by it. Escaping slaves walked to freedom by it. A lost man used the same fixed star to hold a straight line through the night instead of curling back on his own tracks. The sky was a map, and it never needed charging. First pattern break, the rule of threes. Here is the thing the old-timers understood in their bones that we have forgotten. Survival runs on a brutal clock, and every scared person gets the order wrong. You can live about 3 minutes without air, 3 hours without shelter in harsh cold, 3 days without water, and 3 weeks without food. Panic gets it backwards every time. The lost hiker burns his daylight hunting for berries when what will actually kill him tonight is the cold he is ignoring. Your grandfather never made that mistake because his elders drilled the order into him. Shelter first, then water, then fire, then only much later, food. The most dangerous thing in the woods was never the weather or the animals. It was a human being solving the wrong problem first. The tricks on this list only work if you spend them in the right order, and knowing that order was the deepest survival skill of all. It told a frightened man exactly what to do next. Number 20, follow the water down. If your grandfather ever got truly turned around, he had one rule that walked more lost people back to their own kitchens than any other. Find water and follow it downhill. Streams feed creeks, creeks feed rivers, and rivers, almost without exception, lead to people, because every town and farm and mill in this country was built on the water it needed. So he walked downstream, keeping the flow on one steady side, and eventually the trickle joined something bigger, and the bigger thing passed a road, a bridge, a house. It was slower than cutting cross-country, and the going along a bank was often wet and choked with brush. But it was a thread that always led somewhere, and a man following a thread is a man who will get out, while a man walking his own guesses is a man they find in the spring. Number 19, fat wood. Wet weather is when fire matters most and when fire is hardest to make, and your grandfather had a secret weapon hidden inside the forest itself. When a pine tree dies or loses a limb, the stump and the joints where branches met the trunk soak full of resin, saturated with pitch, until the wood turns hard, dense, and amber-streaked. Old woodsmen called it fat wood, or light wood, or fat pine. He would find a rotted pine stump, dig to the heart, and shave off slivers practically soaked in turpentine. That resin burns hot and long, and crucially, it lights even when soaking wet, because the fire feeds on the pitch, not the water. A thumb-sized piece shaved into curls could catch a spark in a downpour and hold a flame long enough to ignite everything else. Modern campers pay good money for it now, never knowing there is a lifetime supply rotting in every pine woods in America. Number 18, birch bark. In the northern forests, your grandfather never worried about tinder as long as he could see a white birch, because that tree wraps itself in one of the finest fire starters on earth. Birch bark peels off in thin papery sheets loaded with volatile oils that burn fiercely, hot enough to catch even when damp. He would strip a handful of the loose, curling outer bark and fluff it into a loose bird's nest. One spark, and it went up in an oily orange flame that would not quit in the wind. He never cut deep into a living tree, only took the loose outer layer, because a woodsman who killed his trees was a woodsman who would run out of forest. That same bark made waterproof containers, torches, even emergency shingles. But its first and best job was fire. And in cold country, Fire was the whole difference between a bad night and a last one. Number 17. Char cloth. Catching a spark on bare tinder is hard, and your grandfather knew a trick that made it almost automatic. He took scraps of old cotton, a worn-out shirt tail, and cooked them into char cloth. He packed the cloth into a small tin with a tiny hole punched in the lid, set the tin in the coals, and let it cook until the smoke stopped pouring out of that hole. Inside, the cotton had turned a fragile black cloth, not burned to ash but transformed, and it would catch the smallest spark and hold a glowing ember you could nurse into flame. A single tin meant fire in the morning, even when everything outside was wet with dew. We buy lighters now and forget that a lighter can fail, but a man who could make char cloth never truly ran out of fire. Number 16. Flint and steel. Long before the disposable lighter, the whole art of making fire lived in two objects your grandfather could hold in one hand, a piece of hard flint and a curved bar of high-carbon steel. He gripped the flint with a bit of char cloth pinched against its sharp edge, then struck the steel down against it in a hard, raking blow. Each strike shaved off a tiny curl of steel so hot it glowed, a spark, and those sparks rained down onto the char cloth until one caught and began to smolder. He folded that glowing ember into a nest of dry tinder, lifted it to his mouth, and blew until the whole bundle burst into flame. It took real practice, the kind you got as a boy under a father's eye. But once your hands knew it, you were never cold and never afraid of the dark. Number 15. The bow drill. And when a man had no flint, no steel, no matches at all, your grandfather still had the oldest way, the one humans have used for tens of thousands of years. He could pull fire straight out of dry wood with his own hands. He carved a small bow from a bent branch in a bootlace, looped the string around a straight wooden spindle, and spun that spindle fast against a flat board by sawing the bow back and forth. The friction ground the wood into hot black dust, and if he kept the rhythm long enough, that dust began to smoke and then glow into a tiny coal. He tipped that coal into a nest of tinder and breathed it to life. It was brutally hard work, and a soft-handed man would give up before the smoke came. But a woodsman who had done it 100 times knew the exact motion and the exact moment to stop. And that stubborn knowledge meant fire was possible even when he had lost everything else. Second pattern break: why we forgot. Here is what nobody wants to admit. We did not lose these skills because they stopped working. We lost them because we stopped needing them. And the moment a skill becomes optional, a single generation can let it die. Your great-grandfather learned to read the woods the way you learned to read a screen, without thinking, because his life ran on it. He walked to school through timber. He hunted to fill the table. He trapped through the winter and split his own wood, and spent more hours outdoors by the age of 12 than most modern adults will spend in a lifetime. Then came the paved road, the electric light, the grocery store, the car, the phone. Each one quietly retired a piece of knowledge that had been passed hand to hand for 10,000 years. Nobody decided to forget how to make fire from a stick. It just stopped getting taught, one skipped lesson at a time, until the chain that had never broken finally did. And the wild did not get any safer. We just quit being ready for it. Number 14. Cattails. If your grandfather found himself lost near a marsh, he was not lost at all. He was standing in a grocery store, a hardware store, and a pharmacy at once. The cattail, that brown corn dog plant standing in every wetland in America, is one of the most useful survival plants on the continent, and he knew every part of it. The white base of the young shoots was food, eaten raw or boiled. The roots held edible starch you could pound and rinse. The fluffy brown heads made superb tinder that caught a spark instantly, and stuffed into clothing they made insulation against the cold. The long leaves wove into mats and cordage. A man who could recognize one common plant had food, fire starter, insulation, and building material within arm's reach. The knowledge did not weigh anything, but it turned a terrifying swamp into a well-stocked pantry. And that shift from fear to abundance was the whole difference between despair and a plan. Number 13. Pine needle tea. Long before anyone said the word vitamin, your grandfather knew a lost or wintering man could sicken without fresh food, and the cure grew on every evergreen around him. He stripped a handful of green pine needles, chopped them, and steeped them in hot, not boiling water until it turned pale gold and smelled of the forest. That simple tea is astonishingly rich in vitamin C, several times what you would get from an orange, and it fights off the slow, gum-bleeding wasting of scurvy that killed sailors and stranded settlers for centuries. It warmed a cold body from the inside and turned a stand of ordinary trees into medicine. French explorers and their native guides survived brutal Canadian winters on evergreen tea when their crews were dying of scurvy, a lesson written down and then, like so much else, quietly forgotten. Your grandfather did not need the science. He knew the tea kept a man strong, and in the woods, strong was survival. Number 12. Acorns. Under nearly every oak in America lies a food source that fed native peoples for thousands of years, and your grandfather knew the one secret that unlocked it. Acorns are packed with fat and calories, but raw they are bitter and even mildly toxic with tannins, which is why most people write them off. The trick was leaching. He cracked and shelled the acorns, chopped the meats, and rinsed them again and again in changes of cold water, or set them in a mesh bag in a running stream until the water no longer ran brown and the bitterness was gone. What remained was a mild, nutty meal that could be boiled into porridge or dried into flour. A single oak could drop enough acorns to feed a family, and they stored for months. A lost man who understood leaching was standing under a tree full of bread, while the man who did not walked past it hungry. Number 11. Snares. A lost man cannot chase down a deer, and your grandfather knew it, so he never tried. He let the woods bring dinner to him with a loop of wire and a little cunning. A snare is nothing but a slip-knot noose set in the narrow run where a rabbit or squirrel travels the same path every day, anchored to a stake or a bent sapling. The animal pushes its head through the loop, the noose draws tight, and the trap does its work while the trapper sleeps. The genius was in the placement, reading the tiny trails and the chewed bark, and setting the loop at exactly the height the animal's head would pass. One man could set a dozen snares at dusk and check them at dawn, letting the whole forest hunt for him overnight. It cost almost no energy, which mattered enormously to a starving body that could not afford to burn calories chasing meals. Farm boys learned it before they learned to drive. Number 10. Boiling with hot rocks. Here is a trick that sounds impossible until you see it done. Your grandfather could bring water to a rolling boil and purify it without ever putting a pot over the fire, because sometimes there was no pot. He found a container that could not touch flame, a hollowed log, a folded sheet of bark, even a hole in the ground lined with a slab of bark. He filled it with the questionable water. Then he heated round stones in the coals until they were searingly hot, lifted them out with 2 green sticks, and dropped them hissing into the water. Rock after rock, the water climbed to a boil, and boiling water is safe water, free of the invisible bugs that give a weakened man the diarrhea that dehydrates and kills. He avoided rocks from riverbeds, which could hold trapped moisture and shatter like grenades in the fire. It was a solution that came from a mind that refused to be stopped by a missing pot. Number 9, pulling water from the air. When there was no stream and no spring, your grandfather could still coax drinking water out of the living forest. He tied a clear bag tightly around a leafy branch of a non-poisonous tree, sealing it as best he could, and let the sun do the work. All day, the leaves breathe out moisture, and that moisture collects on the inside of the bag and runs down to pool in the low corner, clean, distilled, and safe. One bag, on a good branch, could give a cup or more by evening, and several bags could keep a man alive through a dry stretch that would otherwise have finished him. He knew to avoid oaks and other trees whose sap could sicken him, and to choose the sunniest, leafiest limbs. It was slow water, the kind you set up in the morning and collected at dusk. But in dry country, a man who could pull drink out of thin air and green leaves had an edge, and in a drought, that edge was everything. Third pattern break. The knowledge came from necessity. Understand something about where all this came from. Nobody sat down and invented these tricks as a hobby. Everyone was paid for in someone's near death, learned the hard way, and passed down so the next person would not have to learn it the same way. The trapper who nearly froze figured out fat wood and taught his sons. The pioneer wife who watched a neighbor die of a fouled wound learned to pack it with moss. The old guide who buried too many friends learned to make them sit still and build shelter before they did anything else. This was not romantic wilderness wisdom. It was hard, practical knowledge welded together out of other people's disasters, carried forward because the wild punished ignorance without mercy and rewarded preparation with another year of life. Your grandparents were not smarter than you. They were closer to the consequences. When getting it wrong meant dying, people remembered how to get it right, and they made very sure their children remembered too. We softened the consequences, and the memory went with them. Number 8, the debris hut. Cold kills faster than hunger, faster even than thirst, and your grandfather knew a man with no blanket and no tent could still sleep warm, using nothing but the dead leaves under his feet. He propped a long, sturdy ridgepole between a low fork and the ground, leaned shorter sticks along both sides like the ribs of a fish, and then piled on the forest floor armload after armload of dry leaves, ferns, and pine boughs until the whole thing was a mound 2 or 3 feet thick. Then he stuffed the inside full of the same dry debris and burrowed into it like an animal into a nest. That deep layer of trapped air, held still by the leaves, worked exactly like the down in a sleeping bag, holding his own body heat around him through a freezing night. No fire required, no gear required, just sticks and leaves and the knowledge of how thick to build it, because thin walls let the warmth leak out. A man who could build one survived a night that would have killed him in the open. Number 7, stuffing for warmth. When the temperature dropped and a man's clothes were not enough, your grandfather did not shiver and hope. He insulated himself with whatever the forest offered, worn against the skin. He stuffed dry leaves, dry grass, cattail fluff, and moss between his layers of clothing, packing it around his chest and inside his coat until he looked twice his size. That trapped dead air was the whole secret of warmth, and it did not care whether it was held by expensive goose down or a fistful of dead oak leaves. Homeless men have survived brutal city winters this way, and lost woodsmen survived worse. He knew to keep it dry because wet stuffing steals heat instead of holding it, and to insulate the ground beneath him most of all, since the cold earth pulls warmth out of a sleeping body faster than the night air ever could. It looked ridiculous. It also kept his core warm enough to see the morning. Number 6. Sphagnum moss. A wound in the deep woods was a death sentence waiting to happen, and your grandfather had a dressing for it that grew wild in every bog. Sphagnum moss, the soft, pale moss of wet ground, holds many times its weight in liquid and, remarkably, has mild antiseptic properties that slow the growth of bacteria. He gathered it, wrung it out, and packed it over a wound as a bandage that both soaked up blood and helped keep the rot away. This was not folklore. During the First World War, when factory bandages ran short, armies gathered sphagnum moss by the ton to dress the wounds of soldiers, and the men dressed with moss fared as well or better than those with cotton. Native peoples had used it for the same purpose for centuries. A man who knew which moss to grab could clean and cover a cut that might otherwise have festered and taken his arm or his life. The pharmacy was the swamp, and the medicine was free for anyone who knew to kneel down and pick it. Number 5. Willow bark. Long before a pill bottle promised to take the ache away, your grandfather chewed a strip of bark and got the same relief. From the tree, the whole world eventually copied. The inner bark of the willow contains salicin, a natural compound the body converts into something almost identical to aspirin. He peeled a strip of the soft inner bark, chewed it, or steeped it into a bitter tea, and drank it down to ease a headache, a fever, or the deep muscle pain of a body pushed too hard. The knowledge was ancient, written down by Greek physicians thousands of years ago, and passed quietly through country people ever since. In fact, when chemists finally bottled the effect and sold it as aspirin, they were selling what the willow had been giving away for free the whole time. A lost or injured man who could recognize a willow, usually leaning right over the water he also needed, had a painkiller and a fever breaker growing within reach. The forest was full of medicine. You just had to know which trees were doctors. Number 4. Charcoal. When bad water or bad food twisted a man's guts in the wild, your grandfather reached into his own fire for the remedy. Charcoal, the black leftover chunks from a burned-down fire, has a surface riddled with countless microscopic pores, and those pores grab and hold toxins. He crushed clean, cooled hardwood charcoal into a powder, stirred it into water, and drank it down to calm a poisoned stomach and bind up the bad things making him sick. The same charcoal, packed into a layered filter with sand and gravel, cleared cloudy water before he boiled it. This was not desperation. Emergency rooms today keep activated charcoal on the shelf and pour it into people who have swallowed poison, working on the exact same principle your grandfather used with a lump from last night's campfire. He did not know the chemistry. He knew that the black remains of his fire could settle a churning gut and clean a murky cup, and that knowledge turned his campfire into a medicine cabinet. Number 3. Cordage from the woods. Here is the skill modern survival schools now treat as advanced, and your great-grandfather considered as basic as tying his boots. Rope and string are the invisible backbone of survival, and when a man had none, your grandfather made his own from the plants around him. He knew the inner bark of certain trees, basswood, cedar, elm, and the long fibers of plants like dogbane and nettle could be stripped, dried, and twisted into surprisingly strong cord. He split the fibers thin, then rolled and reverse twisted 2 bundles together against his thigh so they locked around each other into a tight, even line. With that homemade cordage, he lashed together shelter poles, set his snares, bound a splint to a broken limb, strung a bow drill, and fashioned a fishing line. Nothing else on this list works well without it. The man who could make strong rope out of bark and weeds could build almost anything the wild demanded, from raw material that lay all around him for free. Number 2, signal fires. All the survival skill in the world only matters if someone finds you, and your grandfather knew the language rescuers spoke. The number 3. 3 of anything, 3 fires, 3 whistle blasts, 3 gunshots, is the universal signal for distress, recognized by woodsmen and rescuers everywhere. So a lost man who wanted to be found built 3 fires in a triangle or a straight line in the most open ground he could reach, a clearing, a ridgetop, a gravel bar by the river where a searcher or a passing plane could actually see them. By day, he smothered the flames with green branches and wet leaves to throw up thick columns of white smoke against the green. By night, the bright flames called across the dark. The hardest part of survival was doing everything else, staying warm and fed and calm, while never for one moment letting the rescuers pass by unseen. A signal fire was a hand raised to the sky saying, "I am still here, come and find me." Number 1, stay put and do not panic. After all the fire making and the star reading and the moss and the snares, the single most important thing your grandfather ever taught was the simplest, and it saved more lives than every other trick combined. When you are lost, stop, sit down, do not run. The instinct of a frightened person is to keep moving, to walk faster and faster in a rising panic, and that instinct is what kills them because a moving lost person walks in circles, walks off cliffs in the dark, walks miles away from the searchers who are already coming, and burns through the energy and warmth their body desperately needs. The old woodsman had a saying that the moment you feel the fear rise, you should sit down and have a coffee, real or imagined, until your head clears. A calm mind builds a shelter. A calm mind reads the trees and finds the water and lights the fire and waits. That 12-year-old boy who walked out of the Maine wilderness after 9 days survived because, terrified as he was, some quiet part of him kept thinking instead of just running. Panic is what the woods use to kill you. A steady head is the one tool you can never lose, and it was always the real secret. Your grandparents knew it. Now you know it too. Here is my challenge. Learn one of these this week, just one. Make char cloth in a tin. Find the North Star from your own backyard. Twist a length of cord from bark. Then ask the oldest person in your family what they knew about the woods before you forget to ask it all. Drop the one you are going to try in the comments, because these were never just camping tricks. They were the difference between walking out and never coming home, and they are only forgotten until someone decides to remember.